is probably not the first thing you think of when you hear the name Ludwig van Beethoven. You would probably imagine his famous portraits depicting a serious man with a stern face, sporting a lion's mane. But actually, Beethoven's sense of humor is one of his most essential qualities that can be found in many of his piano sonatas, particularly in his 16th, the Opus 31, number 1, which is the topic of this discussion. An appreciation of the sonata's comedy and parody is key to interpreting this rather bizarre piece. We begin with the first movement's main joke, which is repeated over and over again throughout. The pianist seems unable to coordinate the two hands. Right from the very beginning, with the first two notes, the right hand just anticipates the left hand by a 16th note. And at each reappearance of this main theme, the right hand always misses the beat, just by a hair's breadth. Some musicians suggest that perhaps Beethoven is subtly mocking orchestras of their time who were incompetent. Or maybe he's referring to the basses in German orchestras that traditionally or stylistically play before the beat. But here, he makes fun of it by doing the opposite. And what's more, it is overdone. It is a mannerism. Just in the first phrase, we get the uncoordinated anticipatory right hand 10 times, the last few times hammered out. And only now do the hands finally come together, somewhat skimpily. And when the hands finally do meet up, they run up and down the keyboard in octaves, frantically dashing around, but only really moving from tonic to dominant. But it is a huge contrast from the earlier pauses and fragments. When we get to the second theme, Beethoven surprises us by going to the median key, which isn't a common move yet in that time. So instead of the usual dominant D major from G to D, Beethoven takes us three sharps even further to B major. Then he starts playing games with the minor major modes, ultimately ending the exposition with the hands not together in B minor. The development takes the main joke of this movement to a ridiculous level. The uncoordinated hands are set to fortes, then longer fortes, then the hands together, running around the keyboard, go through a wild adventure. Right before the recapitulation, the hands are not just out of sync rhythmically, but also harmonically. The right hand, still always early, repeatedly plays the dominant D, while the left hand, arpeggiating the same chord, ends up on an E flat, a half step away. This creates an intense and humorous effect. And Beethoven has to rub in the joke. The first theme returns bigger and forte, hands still not together, and Beethoven obsesses over the same jokes in the recapitulation. Then the coda resumes, with the spastic mannerism of the opening theme. And finally, but wait, the second movement is a reactionary slow movement, one of the longest in Beethoven's cycles of sonatas. Marked Adagio Grazioso, an uncommon pairing of words, it references Italian lyric opera. But in this movement, the singers show off, often in exaggerated runs and trills and pretentious cadences. However, one must also know that as much as this movement has bits and pieces of operatic parody, Beethoven genuinely loved opera, and this movement is filled with love and respect, having the ultimate effect of drama, spirit, and even loftiness. The unassuming and pleasant third movement flows with lyrical lines and subtle hints of wit and swing. For example, this movement in G major begins with a pedal in the dominant D, which is then emphasized on a weak beat, with also sudden contrasts and dynamics throughout the piece. But Beethoven's humor from the first movement ultimately returns in the coda, after a nostalgic passage with pauses and extremes of tempo and dynamics. The music runs into a whirlwind presto that brings us to the end, but not without a final joke. Is it done? Are we finished? I hope that letting you in on the musical jokes help you appreciate Beethoven and the sonata more. As Kirill Gerstein said, Beethoven's humor is underrated. People have this image of him shaking his fist at the heavens, which is true, but there are also a lot of gags and jokes. And there's great beauty and structure and philosophical discourse. And those layers are one reason why this music withstands re examination by thousands of pianists over hundreds of years.